what if I was an Indian?
Yeah.
I would ask a very simple question. My number one competitor today is China.
Yeah.
What is China doing right? What is China doing wrong? What is India doing right? What is India doing wrong? And then calculate. And then I can tell you, let me come onto your program 10 years from now.
10 years. Okay.
10 years from now.
Long.
And I'll tell you the world, and
game.
I'll tell you what the world will be. 10 years from now, United States will be number 2. China will be number 1.
欢迎来到印蓝智库，试想一个极具压迫感的纪元推演。如果10年以后，中美这两个超级大国最终探寻到实力的边界，并达成战略妥协，那么一直试图在大国夹缝中火中取粟的印度，究竟会面临怎样的结局呢？近年来，随着西方推进印太战略，印度被史无前例的被拉拢，成为牵制中国的资源枢纽。在这种红利下，印度国内民族主义情绪高涨，在经贸与边境问题上展现出强硬的姿态。但在真正的现实主义者看来，印度国家的战略正陷入了极其危险的盲区。在本次专访中，嘉宾抛出了一个极其冷酷的战略推演。首先，中国未来必将成为世界第一，而中美两国最终会基于实力的重新校准达成战略妥协。其次，留给印度的战略窗口期已经极其短暂。嘉宾直言，印度必须学会精明与冷酷，趁中国目前还是世界第二，仍需要稳静周边时，才是印度谈判利益最大化的唯一时机。若等到10年以后，去和成为世界第一的中国博弈，将毫无还手之力。更致命的是，它无情揭穿了印度的软肋，被民族情绪绑架，彻底偏离了国家竞争的唯一主线——经济基本盘。大国的博弈终局到底是什么？当红利吃尽，印度的运势将如何改写？请看正片，听听战略智囊的深度剖析。
On Al Jazeera this week, which spoke about, Muslims in internment camps being forced to eat pork every Friday as part of what's called re-education. Do civil liberties not matter at all? When it comes to India, the whole world comments. When it comes to China, everybody's quiet.
Well, I think, as you know, India was very upset when Prime Minister Trudeau yesterday made some comments
about the farmer protest.
Yes. Yeah. And I think we in Asia are wiser than the West is. And, just to put in a big historical context, I've been a student of the West for a long time. The West has lost its political domination. It has lost its economic domination. It only now has intellectual domination. And it preserves its intellectual domination by lecturing the whole world on human rights issues, when the West, as you know, is completely hypocritical on human rights issues. I'll give you a simple example. The European countries will condemn any country that carries out torture, right? If India carries out waterboarding, the European countries will be the first to insist that India stops waterboarding. But when the United States was the first major developed country to reintroduce torture, the European countries kept absolutely quiet. So on human rights, it's okay for NGOs to speak about it, because NGOs like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, they're completely objective, neutral, and they don't carry an agenda of anybody. But whenever any government tries to criticize any country on human rights, I say they've got double standards, because they will only criticize their adversaries and not their friends. And just, since you mentioned how bad the human rights situation is in China, in the 1971, when the United States was fighting the evil Soviet Empire, it had a choice. It could either join the world's largest democracy in India to fight the Soviet Union, or it could fight the largest communist government in the world, which, by the way, under Mao, saw far greater human rights abuses than anything you have in China today, right? Far greater. And you know what? the great democracy, United States chose China over India. And I think many Indians, if you don't mind me saying this, can be very naive about geopolitics. Geopolitics is not about friendship. Geopolitics is not about whether they like you or love you. Geopolitics is all about what's in my interest. And that's what they will do. And so I think it's important to, the European Union also wanted to impose human rights standards on India also. So that's what they've been doing all the time. So it's important in geopolitics to be, as I said, calculate what is in your interest and do what's in your interest.
But what happens then to civil liberties? I actually agree with you. I agree with you on the one point that you make, that a lot of commentary by the Western world is full of humbug and full of hypocrisy. I mean, I remember this time, for example, when Obama was on a presidential visit to India, and before going, he made a lot of comments about the constitutional sort of need to preserve pluralism in India, which of course is all true. But then he took the flight from here to Saudi Arabia, where he didn't say anything of the kind. So one does see all of these gaping double standards. But when you think of, and I agree with you on that, but when you think of these Muslims in internment camps in China, and you hear the horror stories that come out, should the world look the other way? And there are things, for example, when you look back at, let's say, apartheid and Africa, there have been moments in history when global pressure has pushed change. So, is your binary really sort of always applicable?
No. By the way, I want to emphasize that we should advance human rights.
Yeah.
Because, I don't want to live in a country where my nails are being pulled out, I don't like that.
Yeah.
But just since you mentioned apartheid, I mean, you must surely know the reason why the apartheid regime was so resilient and could survive so many years is because United States and United Kingdom supported South Africa. I mean, I hope you know that.
Of course.
Apartheid,
Thatcher's the enormous pressure on Thatcher from the Commonwealth to actually impose those sanctions. But
and you know that the United States Congress declared Nelson Mandela a terrorist. And do you know that they only removed the terrorist title 6 years after apartheid ended? I mean, look at that. Look at that. So you tell me that the United States is a defender of human. United States.
I don't care about the United States. I'm just asking how the world should react. The world is not the United States.
True. But at the same time, I completely agree with you. But as you know, if someone came to India and lectured India publicly and say, why did you tear down the mosque? Why do you do all that? You know everyone's going to react very badly. But if I want to tell a friend of mine, right, hey, I think you're doing something wrong. If I broadcast it in the media, he's not going to change. But I know if I talk to him privately and try to talk to him, things will change. And I have seen in my lifetime so many countries where the human rights situation has improved dramatically. And I'm going to go back to Indonesia. In 1965, the estimates of the number of people killed after the coup is a few million, right? Few million, okay? Now guess what? Look at Indonesia today, how it has improved. And you know how it has improved? And you want to know the real story? You know what? They elected a president, SBY, who studied in the US in a military college. And he learned the most important lesson. The role of the military is to be subservient to the civilian government. And Indonesia, which was a military-run government, right, for many years, like Pakistan, okay, suddenly changed. And how would that change happen? It's through quiet persuasion and through peer pressure. So all this grandstanding on Xinjiang is not going to get you anywhere. But if you want to change Chinese behavior on Xinjiang, and I would say, frankly, if it's about Muslims, don't you think the Muslim countries should take the lead? How is it that when the Western countries wrote a letter criticizing China, not one Muslim country supported that letter, not one. So it's better for the Muslims to go to China quietly, talk to China quietly, and see what can be done. And I believe that such quiet persuasion can make a difference. And I'll give you another example, okay, since many of your viewers may not believe me. For so many years, the West put sanction after sanction after sanction on Myanmar. What happened? Nothing, zero. What did ASEAN do? ASEAN said no sanctions. We will welcome Myanmar. Come join our family. But after joining ASEAN, Myanmar went from being a Syria, right, towards becoming a reasonably stable, well-balanced state today with no major civil wars. That's amazing. I mean, it's not perfect. But look at the transformation that we have done. So how did we do this? And I can tell you the Indonesian foreign minister who brought in Myanmar said the only way to do so, to transform people, is to talk to them privately. So I would say talk to the Chinese privately. Don't join the West in grandstanding.
But when you speak about the silence of the Muslim countries, one of the countries of the world that has remained silent is Pakistan, right?
Yes.
And from an Indian perspective, Pakistan now is seen almost as a kind of vassal state of China. And so when these border tensions, in fact, erupted, one of the things that the Indian military had to war game was for a possible two-front conflict, and it's always war game for that. But there's a kind of Pakistan is sort of being seen as a continuum of China. How do you see that relationship? Obviously, for China, it's all about self-interest. For any nation, its choices are about self-interest. There, I agree with you. But from an Indian perspective, we're looking at this. We're looking at Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. We're looking at the sort of one road project, and we're going. Pakistan is just like now an addendum, almost an addendum to China.
Well, in international affairs, I always believe that the biggest problem is when you get emotional, right? Mm-hmm. And if Pakistan was a complete vassal state of China, why does it go to the IMF when it needs assistance, right? Mm. It's a vassal state of China. It should say to hell with the IMF, to hell with all that. I mean, that doesn't make sense. And so I would say that, it's a big mistake to use labels, okay? Yeah. And it's also important to ask yourself, again, if you don't mind me being very frank.
No, please.
Southeast Asia had as many divisions as South Asia has today. Indonesia had a confrontasi policy against Singapore and Malaysia. Indonesia blew up a bomb in the middle of Singapore's financial district, killing Singaporeans, right? A terrorist act. Thailand and Malaysia have fought over separatist provinces. Philippines claims a state in Malaysia. I mean, these are all still ongoing problems, by the way. You know what? Look at how we manage problems. You will always have problems between states. That's a given. The only question is how you manage those problems.
Right.
And I would say it's very important for South Asia to come to Southeast Asia and say, how is this in these countries? And the divisions in Southeast Asia are as serious as anybody is. Out of 650 million people, you have 250 million Muslims, 150 million Christians, 150 million Buddhists, Hinayana Buddhists, Mahayana Buddhists, and you have Taoists, Confucianists, Hindus, and communists. Southeast Asia is the most diverse region of planet Earth, which is why the British historians calls it the Balkans of Asia. And logically, the cultural differences in India are nothing. Nothing. And look at me. I mean, I grew up as a child. And even till today, the only reason I could write my book, Has China Won, is because I got to listen to Muhammad Rafi. And where was Muhammad Rafi born? In Lahore. And I went to see his house in Lahore, right? So you're telling me that the cultural difference within Pakistan and in India is that great? Come on. So if Southeast Asia, right, can overcome far greater differences, and the differences will be there. You can't change them. don't believe that magically we will live in a fairy tale world where we'll all like each other a lot. No, we will never like each other. We'll be different. But you have to live in the real world. And in the real world, there are real success stories. And Southeast Asia, the most important thing about Southeast Asia, every Indian should know, and I've documented this in my book, ASEAN Miracle, 9 out of the 10 Southeast Asian states have an Indic base. And I can tell you in 2017 or 2016, please check, when Philippines, the world's largest Catholic country, Philippines, organized an East Asian summit, and when all the presidents were there, Obama and everyone and were there, what did Philippines put on as a cultural presentation for the Philippines? The Ramayana. Aren't you shocked? The world's largest. So here in Southeast Asia, where you have Indic cultures, we are able to get along despite our differences. And frankly, South Asia should learn some lessons from Southeast Asia on how you manage differences. Because you're not going to change each other. You have to learn to accept that we are different. And by the way, I know the Singapore and Malaysia, I can give you an example how neurotic it can be. We were married for 2 years. You were one country. Then you know what? We got separated. And then we continue to live in the same house. Can you imagine a divorced couple living in the same house? That's Singapore and Malaysia. But you want an example of good cooperation? Come to Singapore and Malaysia. So we have real success stories. So why does India always focus on problems of the past, on differences, and not focus on what can be done to learn lessons from others and learn to find a better way? There are better ways.
How do you see, for example, the Pakistan-China equation?
Well, I think, geopolitics, as I told you earlier, where just as the United States chose the world's largest communist country under Mao Zedong as a partner, countries don't care what your internal system is about. If it suits their geopolitical interests, they will work with the country. And right now, there's a convergence of geopolitical interests between Pakistan and China. So that's what happens. So, and just as there is, by the way, a convergence of geopolitical interests within India and United States today. That's what's happening also. And that is not driven by the fact that they like each other or believe in each other. It's about geopolitical interests. But I do believe, and I'm going to say something that will shock you.
Go ahead. I'm pretty shock-proof, but try me. Yeah.
Okay. That I can imagine a free trade agreement between China, India, and Pakistan that will benefit all three countries.
That does shock me, and I can't see it happening. See it happening in my
I know.
lifetime.
You see, exactly. Yeah. But what I described to you is what has happened in East Asia. China and Vietnam are far greater adversaries. And look at the trade between Vietnam and China today. It's amazing. So, and at the end of the day, why is Vietnam doing this? Let me tell you what Vietnam is doing this. Vietnam is trading heavily with China, not because the Vietnamese love China. They are using China to make themselves strong in the same way that China used the United States to make itself strong. So you use your adversary to make yourself stronger. Now that's the best game of geopolitics you can play.
Okay, I have some questions for you on our live stream that I want to actually just pick up one by one. First is that Abhishek Singh says the onus of resolving the differences between India and China at the moment should be on China. Why blame India?
I'm sorry. I can only help you by being very frank. I've studied geopolitics for 50 years. I don't know of any geopolitical dispute where one side is 100% right and the other side is 100% wrong.
But there are acts of aggression. There are acts of military aggression that are recorded. I mean, that the British were colonialists is a recorded fact. That there are, I'm just giving you one example. So I'm saying there are everything is not normative. Some things are empirical.
No, so as you know, in the case of China and India, the border dispute, you also know that 3 times the Chinese leaders, Zhou Enlai, Deng Xiaoping, proposed to India, we will never be able to figure this all out, this border dispute. Why not just accept the line as it is and settle as it is? And as you know, 3 times India turned China down. That's also a fact. And frankly, I think it was unwise to turn down that offer. It was very unwise because that would have settled the matter. And as you know, China has settled its border disputes with Russia, with Vietnam, with Mongolia, with everybody else. It's settled. So it is possible to do a deal. And I think it's important, therefore, to figure out at the end of the day, if you want to succeed, you got to figure out what are my bigger, more fundamental interests. And this is a marathon race between China and India. It's a marathon race. We will know the winner 100 years from now. And the marathon race will be determined by who has the stronger economic legs. If your economic legs are weak, you will lose the race. If your economic legs are strong, you will win the race. And by the way, if India can achieve half the per capita income of Indians in the United States, India will have the world's largest economy by far.
Right.
So the potential for the Indian economy is #1 in the world.
But let me push.
Can match the economic potential of India.
But let me push you on this, on the free trade point that you make when you earlier said that India can compete with anybody. We have a question on our live stream from Sanjay who says, no, I don't agree. The free trade agreement between any country and China can only benefit China because trade with China is a one-way street.
Okay. By the way, trade can never be one way.
I think the point is that it's not a level.
Excuse me. You know something? Yeah. If it was all one way, you know what's going to happen? Nobody, if others don't benefit from trading with China, then they won't have money to buy goods from China, you know, to buy goods from China. And by the way, if you look at Southeast Asia again, it's amazing that the Southeast Asian economies, which were behind China in so many ways, many of them have surplus with China. And by the way, it is possible to negotiate a free trade deal with China where the China will give you unilateral concessions temporarily to enable you to catch up in the competition. And China was very generous to Southeast Asia in giving what they call an early harvest in that.
So I want to give you a sense of how a lot of Indians feel, and that's why I'm picking up an emotional question, even though you spend a lot of time on the conversation saying the one thing you should never be in geopolitics is emotional. But this reflects how many Indians are thinking and feeling today. Nandita Ghosh on our stream says, China wants to push India into a war and then it will crush India. There is a sense, what you call the marathon competition on between India and China. There is a sense that there's room for only one winner here. Right. And that is why the kind of sort of coexistence that you're speaking about, even though there are not the kind of historical conflicts that India has with Pakistan, with China. And, you know, I remember Modi used to say before this border conflict that not one shot has been fired at these borders for decades. That unfortunately now doesn't apply. We're actually seeing a kind of, you know, we've seen a military conflict. But how do you address this Indian apprehension, which is very real, which is very widespread, that now the narrative is it's not Pakistan, it's China that's the real adversary. It's China that has blocked, for example, UN sanctions against terror groups like the Lashkar-e-Taiba, the Jamaat-e-Dawa. You've served as the president of the UN Security Council. You know what these concerns are about. So just address that concern, that China does not even stand with India on the issue of terrorism. Yeah,
I mean, I can see the question from Nandita Ghosh that China wants to push India into a war and then it can try to crush India.
Yes.
You know, sometimes some truths are very painful. The Chinese are very, very concerned about a war. but they're very concerned about a war with the United States. Very concerned.
Right.
Because the United States is clearly trying to push China down. I mean, that's obvious, for obvious reasons. And if you go to Beijing, and of course, I've been there a few times, and you mention India, they look very puzzled. Oh, really? They're concerned about us? Why? China, I was amazed at the indifference of the Chinese to India. Because for them, their number one threat, and by the way, there'll be a monumental struggle between US and China in the next 20 years. The Chinese have only one obsession. They got to survive this US onslaught against China, which is coming, which is, as I say, I've documented in my book, Has China Won? And they are focused on that. And so as a result of that, that creates opportunities for others. So it creates opportunities for Southeast Asia. Because in Southeast Asia, because China doesn't want Southeast Asia to become an anti-Chinese lake, the Chinese are doing their best to build win-win economic partnership with Southeast Asia. And I can guarantee you this, that if you can sit down and have a rational dialogue, where you've got to push aside your emotions for a while, you'll find that China will be very happy to work out a win-win arrangement with India too, for the same reason that they want to focus on the United States. And you're right to point out the major trade deficit between US and within China and India. You're absolutely right. But there are ways and means of dealing with trade deficits. And, for example, when the United States was very worried about the major trade deficit with the Japanese, as you know, the United States and Japan had negotiations, and the Japanese agreed to what is called VERs, voluntary export restraints. So, that what I'm saying to you is there's no problem in the world is new. Every problem has got a precedent. And so you can find ways and means of dealing with it, and then take advantage of the larger market.
And there are questions on that, and I'll come to that. But if the Chinese are indeed indifferent to India, how do you explain this mass military buildup at the border with India? Well, why block sanctions against terror groups like the JUD and the Jaish-e-Mohammed and the Lashkar, which is, this is a fight that's been happening over the years in the UN.
I completely agree with you. It's a huge mistake to block sanctions against terrorist groups. But as you know, I mean, I'm sorry to say this, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. Exhibit A, Mandela. Mandela was called a terrorist by United States, as you know. But on the cases you mentioned, yes, it's unwise of China to block the designation of terrorist groups. I agree with you there.
Okay. Pradeep Arora on our live stream seems to sort of have your way of thinking and says, should India use the differences between China and the United States to our advantage?
It's very simple. Be cunning. Be very cunning. See, geopolitics is not about being nice. It's about being cunning. It's as simple as that. I mean, and that's what great geopolitical thinkers are about. Henry Kissinger, George Kennan, they're very cunning. And how are they cunning? What is the best position India can be in this dispute? The best, if you can imagine a seesaw, okay? On one side, the seesaw is China. On the other side, the seesaw is United States, right? The seesaw is going like this. What's the best position for India to be in the middle? So wherever India puts its foot, the seesaw goes that way. And guess what? Both United States and China will be super nice to India. That's about being cunning.
But I would have said before this border conflict with China, India was probably there, though probably leaning towards the United States, but still trying to be in the middle of that seesaw. And I think that because of this conflict, if there is no resolution in this conflict, you will see India leaning closer to the US than to China. If India can't sit squarely in the middle, India has to be guided by her own self-interest, the same self-interest that you say China is guided by.
Joe, as I say, geopolitics is about being cunning. when China made its reconciliation with the United States in 1971, you know which government China recognized as the legal government of China? Do you remember that? The United States government didn't recognize the People's Republic of China. It recognized the opposite government, Republic of China. So can you imagine that, okay? Just imagine just imagine this. If China says Pakistan is the ruler of all of South Asia, right? And just imagine that. Then despite that, India makes a deal with China. That's the analogy. And why did China do that? Why didn't China insist and say, you must first recognize me as the legal government of China? The Chinese said, no, it's okay, don't worry. Right now, I need you because I have the bigger game against the Soviet Union. So the fundamental problem in India, and I know, I told you, right? My mother had a very close shave as a Hindu nationalist leaving Pakistan. She was born in Sindh, and she had a very close shave. My mother is the most fervent Indian nationalist I ever met my whole life. So I understand Indian nationalism very well. It's in my blood, you know. But at the same time, if you want to succeed in geopolitics, the biggest mistake you can make is to be emotional. Indians are so emotional about this whole affair that they can't realize it suits India's interest. Let me emphasize this, to say, look at the bigger picture. How do I play the bigger picture? Why am I so focused on the border issue, right? And you know, the number of things that the United States provoked China on were far greater. But China said, doesn't matter. I want to focus on the big picture. And so what I would do if I was in India is focus on the big picture and not get emotional about that. And on the border issue, by the way, one of my colleagues at NUS, you know, I've started something called the Asian Peace Program.
Yes.
And there are simple, commonsensical solutions. The reason why you had fisticuffs between Chinese and Indian soldiers is because they went to check whether a tent was there or not there. Why don't we put technology, right? Use advanced technology, put technology all the way down within China and India borders, put sensors, then you don't have anybody having to go check. And both sides have a common setup. So there are technological solutions to make sure that you don't clash against at the border again.
But you know, there are many emotional questions for you. Much as you urge Indians to not be emotional, you are agitating them to be more and more emotional. And I'm seeing a number of agitated comments. So Rajshekhar Reddy asks you, are you saying India should surrender Ladakh to China in exchange for some trade deal for a few billions? And a similar question from Abhishek Sharma. In your equation of geopolitics, what happens to territorial sovereignty? And I think that's an important question.
I would say don't give up an inch of Indian territory.
Yeah.
Don't give up an inch. And I would say you can make a deal where you keep every inch of Indian territory and get more if you are cunning and not emotional. And this is what is puzzling, you know. It's very strange. I mean, Indians believe that geopolitics started 1 or 2 years ago. It's a 2,000-year-old game, right? And you always must play the long game. And you must maximize your advantages, always, right? And don't lock yourself into a position where you have no other option. Never do that. Give yourself plenty of options. And the more options you have, the better off you are, right? And just as the United States was able to use a country that was technically an adversary of the United States, China, and help it to win. Use your adversary. Use China. Don't be so emotional as to say, I can never use my adversary. Why not? You should be cunning. You should use your adversary.
Talking about technology, how do you see the Indian move to block a whole host of Chinese apps?
Oh, I would say that's peanuts. Peanuts.
Why?
Life is much bigger than this TikTok, PUBG. And this is an example of being petty. It's peanuts. The Chinese don't care. The Chinese, remember, from the Chinese point of view, there is a much bigger game. And you can ban TikTok, you can do all that. It doesn't hurt China at all. No, zero hurt at all. But the important thing to ask, and you know what? China and the United States will come to some accommodation. 10 years from now.
What will happen to China and China and India? Where will China and India be 10 years from now in this equation, in your opinion?
It all depends on how cunning India is. It all depends on how you play the game. Right. You see, right now, you have a window of opportunity because China is still number 2. It's much easier to negotiate with the number 2, not with the number 1. But you want to wait 10 years? Then when you negotiate with the number 1, it's much harder. So you got to be very brutal about these things, and stop being so emotional. I mean that's a fundamental problem with the way Indians look at the world. By the way, I'm not every other country looking at this whole thing is sort of wondering why are the Indians so can't set aside one thing and say, okay, let's focus on the big picture. The big picture is the economic game. Right. And are you winning the economic game or are you losing the economic game? It's very simple.
欢迎回来，这段犀利的简评精准刺穿了国际政治中最核心的现实主义法则。大国博弈的终局是稳妥而非毁灭。中美在10年内达成某种默契，是霸权演进与核威慑下的理性必然。如果印度的国家大战略完全建立在中美永远对抗的假设之上，一旦中美达成战略平衡，印度苦心经营的地缘杠杆将瞬间失效，甚至沦为大国交易的边缘化弃子。第二，剥离情绪，回归经济硬通货。嘉宾强调的精明与冷酷，击中了印度发展模式的痛点。国际秩序唯一的硬通货是工业化能力与资本积累，而不是边境上的意气之争或封禁软件的民族主义狂欢。印度因选举政治而煽动的情绪，正严重地绑架了其经济决策，甚至人为地切断与全球最大工业国的供应链关系，在战略上极其短视。没有任何一个国家能够靠着在大国间的首鼠两端或沉溺于地缘投机而真正崛起。战略机遇期转瞬即逝，大国竞争的下半场拼的是基础设施、制造业效率与科技实力的冷酷较量。世界格局的重塑不相信情绪，只臣服于实打实的综合国力。你认为印度能否在窗口期关闭前理智转向？欢迎在评论区留下你理性的思考。关注印兰智库，我们下期深度分析再见。